U-534. Only 4 intact German U-boats still exist in the world today, but U-534 almost didn't make it into that famous foursome. Treasure hunters thought that the boat may have held Nazi riches due to its final actions in service, and so they dredged it up after it lied on the bottom of the ocean for decades. When World War II was coming to a close, U-534, the last U-boat to leave Germany, was informed that they should surrender. However, for some reason, the submarine refused to do so. Instead, the ship and 2 speedier submarines accelerated in the direction of Norway. Sadly for the crew, British planes easily sank U-534 after quickly catching up with the boats. A few of the 59 crew members on board the sub managed to escape by squeezing through the torpedo tubes like human missiles, and in total, a surprising 44 people made it out alive, although it's still unclear why they didn't just surrender. Ege Jensen, a Danish wreck hunter, found the U-534's wreck in 1986. A Dutch salvage business brought her to the surface in 1993, nearly 50 years after she had been dropped to the ocean floor. Even though there was a decent amount of speculation and rumors regarding the U-boat's last mission and what riches the ship may have contained, no gold, stolen art, or sign of any fugitive Nazi war criminals were discovered. However, what they did find in the vessel was still pretty cool. Led by Jensen, the salvage crew discovered a bunch of explosives, 13 torpedoes, 2 Enigma encryption machines, intriguing documents, as well as some personal items like chess sets, photographs, cigars, and songbooks. U-534 was, in essence, a time capsule. The boat was eventually dismantled and transported in pieces to Birkenhead in 1996, where it's now the focal point of the U-boat story exhibition. Each piece of the vessel may now be observed, and the sub's narrative can be explored in full. Yet, to this day, no one that's visited the display has been able to explain the enigma of why the sub refused to die. Raising of K-129. If you're a fan of 007 and submarines, the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. has you covered. Hidden in plain sight in a corner exhibit of the museum, a submarine control panel is on display, and it's accompanied by a swoopy banged wig, a piece of manganese, and some detailed white prints. These items together constitute remnants of a daring Cold War robbery mission that the museum's curator, Vince Houghton, views as incredibly audacious. Under the covert Project Azorian mission, the CIA commissioned the building of a 600-foot ship to recover a submerged Soviet submarine from the bottom of the ocean. When the Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129 mysteriously vanished in the Pacific Ocean in 1968, a 6-year expedition began. Both American and Soviet submarines patrolled the open waters carrying nuclear weapons in this post-Cuban Missile Crisis era, ready for a future conflict. While the Soviets formerly accused the Americans of involvement in foul play, other stories indicated that the sinking was caused by a mechanical malfunction, such as an accidental missile engine firing. The U.S., which had previously utilized Air Force equipment to find 2 of its own sunken submarines, was able to pinpoint the K-129 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii and 16,500 feet below the water. The Soviet Union had given up its hunt for the K-129 and the nuclear warheads it carried after only 2 months. The declassified CIA history of the project claims that no nation in the world has ever before been able to raise an item of this weight and size from such a depth. Even though the submarine delivered a tempting treasure of information, the intelligence community internally debated the cost-to-reward ratio of such a costly and dangerous effort. Houghton said that the K-129's significance came from more than simply the code books and nuclear bombs it carried, but an opportunity had also presented itself which would allow the U.S. to understand how the submarines of the opposing nation were made. The U.S. could potentially improve its ability to identify the K-129 if it knew how its sonar equipment worked or how the submarine remained silent. The CIA came up with various crazy ideas about how to recover the sunken submarine. One idea suggested producing enough gas beneath the ocean's floor to buoy the submarine to the surface. Instead, they decided on a design that was evocative of an old arcade game, a huge claw that would grab the K-129 and pull it into the belly of a huge ship. At first, the initiative was projected to have only a 10% success rate. After careful consideration by the Secretary of Defense and the White House, President Nixon approved the salvage attempt when given the rare chance to retrieve it secretly from the Soviet Union. The CIA was requested to lead the operation rather than the Navy in order to keep the salvage attempt black or secret. Under a CIA contract, the Hughes Glomar Explorer was created and constructed specifically for the covert recovery of K-129. The ship would be mining manganese nodules on the ocean floor, according to the cover story. This recovery mission was one of the priciest and darkest secrets of the Cold War. From Long Beach, California, the ship traveled 3,008 miles to the location of the recovery site. According to one story, the Hughes Glomar explorer grappled with the wreck of K-129 in the spring of 1974 and was able to lift the forward half of it. However, as it was being raised, the claw experienced a critical failure, which caused the forward section to break into two pieces. As a result, the crucial sail area and center section were sent falling back to the ocean floor. Consequently, it's claimed that K-129's central sail area and after portions were not found. The precise contents of the recovered section seemed to be top secret, although the Soviets believed that torpedoes with nuclear warheads, operating manuals, code books, and coding machines were among the items that were found. Unofficially, according to another source, the Americans retrieved the bow portion of the ship, which was home to a couple nuclear torpedoes but no cryptography tools or code books. The massive submarine raising mission appeared to have gone smoothly for the United States, as Ford's Secretary of Defense James Schlesinger declared in a meeting at the White House. The Glomar Explorer was being used as a front by Hughes Summa Corporation, which was randomly robbed in early 1975. The whole incident ended up making national headlines in the Los Angeles Times and on television. The story came out a lot later than it should have, since famous New York Times reporter Seymour Hersh had been tracking it since 1973, but had honored a request from CIA Director William Colby to hide it. And when the mission was leaked, it was riddled with a large amount of inaccuracies. That spring, the CIA also encountered a diplomatic conundrum. They intended to avoid directly admitting that they had illegally taken a submarine from the monitoring Soviets, but they were compelled to react in some way after being pressed by the Soviet ambassador to the United States and Freedom of Information Act requests from the media. The Glomar response, "We can neither confirm nor deny," was created in an effort to tread this delicate diplomatic line and adhere to FOIA regulations. Project Azorian is still regarded as legendary among the intelligence community, 45 years after the Glomar Explorer recovered part of the K-129 from the ocean floor. Glass cases on display now contain items like crew members' onesies, fake safety awards, a barometer, and even a wig worn by CIA Deputy Director Vernon Walters during an undercover visit to the Glomar Explorer. They also feature a scaled version of the detailed blueprint used to design the now non-functioning ship and a mention of engineer John Graham. According to Houghton, because Azorian was so daring, ambitious, and practically doomed to fail, it stood out. However, despite only being able to recover a portion of the submarine, the ship was built and the almost absurd idea of a giant claw reaching down to the ocean floor proved practical. And given the project's size, the whole thing surprisingly managed to stay a secret for 7 years. The Azorian story is portrayed by the Spy Museum as an ode to ingenuity and as an example of how the unsolvable challenges of the intelligence community may be solved through inventiveness and modern technology. Would you ever visit the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C.? Let us know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. USS S-51. The crew on board the USS S-51 submarine were sleeping in their bunks for the majority of the night of September 25, 1925. The S-class submarine, now well into her third year of service, was on a mission toward the Atlantic and was trudging along the surface close to Rhode Island. That night, the steamship known as the City of Rome approached the port with its light on. The watch crew on S-51 reasonably anticipated that the steamer would alter its course because the submarine had the right of way. However, the City of Rome continued to get closer. It was already too late when the crews of both ships realized they were about to collide with one another. The crew had mere seconds to flee after the steamer crashed into S-51, ripping open a gash in its hull and quickly flooding the ship. Only 3 of the men lived to tell the tale, and a total of 33 sailors died as a result. The accident came at the absolute worst time, as the Navy Department was already experiencing a flood of public criticism. A few weeks prior to the incident, a Navy officer flying the first nonstop journey to Hawaii in a seaplane ran out of fuel and disappeared. In the end, the pilot was saved. Even worse, the USS Shenandoah, a Navy airship, had just sunk in Ohio, killing all 14 members of its crew. The public and the sailing branch both urged that S-51 and the crew's bodies be recovered from the water. Rear Admiral Edward Ellsberg was assigned the mission's leadership by the Navy. On the open sea, this practice was unheard of. Using diving gear from the 1920s, Ellsberg's team would spend months diving to S-51, which sat at 132 feet below the surface. The submarine might as well have been on the moon by today's standards. It would take astronaut-level bravery to board it. The strategy called for frequent dives into S-51, and they closed off as many of her internal compartments as possible, emptying the water to give buoyancy. Nevertheless, some compartments couldn't be sealed due to their severe damage. The crew then attached pontoons and raised her up after spending months living in a tiny flotilla of tugboats, rescuing and repairing ships. However, the task was tedious and discouraging due to the high risk of diving operations and bad weather. On June 5, 1926, the salvage crew finally raised S-51 and towed her to New York. But before that, the most challenging duty was digging 2 tunnels beneath the submarine, where the sailors ran chains to hold on to the bottom of the ship. The submarine needed to be dug out of the muck and clay, but using picks and shovels would have been too taxing and difficult given the heavy, uncomfortable diving suits. Instead, the sailors attacked the soil with high-pressure water hoses. The risks associated with this choice were extremely dangerous. Progress was hindered, but the hoses remained under control when the water pressure was reduced. Ellsberg then called Francis Smith, a tunneling sailor who had a terrifying near-death experience. He was buried 135 feet under the water's surface in ice-cold water, complete darkness, and complete loneliness. The only sense he had was the sensation of the iron hull of the S-51 pressing into his back as he lay stretched out flat in a tiny hole that was barely wider than his torso and too small for him to turn around in. While a dark torrent of ice-cold water that was heavy with muck and clay flowed backward around him, he grabbed the high-pressure water nozzle and dug his way further. Smith eventually emerged from the tunnel after a grueling period of time. Somehow, Smith had managed to slide the nozzle back between his knees despite being unable to turn around, and by manipulating it with his feet, he had washed his way out of the cave-in backwards. Smith took a few minutes to relax on the ocean floor before picking up his hose, making his way back into the tube, and continuing to wash his way towards the keel for another 30 minutes. Francis Smith displayed incredible bravery when, in the still waters of the ocean beneath the wreck of the S-51, he washed himself out of what might have been his final resting place. Then, with deliberate action, he turned around and returned to the black hole from which he had escaped, working his way deeper and deeper into it. No act ever carried out in the heat of battle where thousands cheer you on can compare to this story. In the end, the submarine was dismantled and the remains of the lost sailors were taken out. The Hulk was eventually purchased by the Borough Metal Company of Brooklyn, New York on June 4, 1930 for $3,320. The Kursk disaster. On August 12, 2000, a Russian nuclear submarine sank to the bottom of the Barents Sea. Afterwards, all 118 crew members were discovered to be dead. The exact reasons for the catastrophe still remains unknown to this day. On August 10, 2000, the Kursk sailed out of port to engage in war games with the Russian military. In order to perform military maneuvers, Russian aircraft, ships, and submarines gather in the Barents Sea, which is located above the Arctic Circle. Before firing a practice torpedo on August 12, Kursk had 2 unexplained explosions in its front hull that were closely spaced apart. As a result, the submarine was plunged toward the ocean floor. The Kursk was 500 feet long and carried 24,000 tons of weight. It could go at 28 knots and had 2 nuclear reactors. It was the biggest attack submarine in the whole world, over 3 times bigger than the largest submarines in the U.S. Navy. Numerous countries volunteered to aid in the rescue operation because it was uncertain what would become of the 118 Russian crew members who were on board the Kursk. However, the stubborn Russian government declined all offers of assistance. A week later, divers eventually reached Kursk, but they discovered no evidence of life. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, gave in to intense pressure and agreed to raise the submarine from the bottom of the water for an examination, despite the fact that no ship or item of such scale had ever been brought up from the depths of the ocean. The operation also had a very narrow window of opportunity, mostly due to the Barents Sea remaining frozen for most of the year. Thanks for watching. What would you like to see be raised from the depths of the ocean floor? Let us know in the comments below, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.